Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. The National Caucus and Center on Black Aging, the Health and Wellness Program, presents a webinar on Alzheimer's disease. Know the 10 warning signs. Our presenter today is Michael Smith. Michael Smith is community educator and support group leader with the Alzheimer's Association National Capital Area Chapter. Mr. Smith is retired from Georgetown University, where he served as director in the university's Office of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Affirmation Action for over 20 years. He received his undergraduate degree in psychology from the Georgetown University and his master's degree in social work from Howard University. Mr. Smith, thank you again for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Tellisford. Mr. Watson, if you can put up the presentation and we'll get underway. Voila. Okay, so this afternoon's conversation will entail indeed talking about the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's. It's designed for those who want to learn more about the warning signs of Alzheimer's and other dementias, and those who have noticed memory or thinking changes in themselves or their loved ones. And throughout this afternoon's presentation, we'll see a number of videos that have been in place in various settings. They are both from researchers and experts in the field, as well as those individuals who actually have been diagnosed with either mild cognitive impairment or some form of dementia indeed. So let's go to the next slide. We're hoping by the end of this afternoon, you'll have the following takeaways: that you'll understand age-related memory, thinking, and behavior changes. You're going to be able to recognize some of the common warning signs of Alzheimer's and dementia, be able to discuss the tips for approaching someone about memory concerns, explain the importance of early detection and the benefits of a diagnosis, identify possible tests and assessments for the diagnostic process, and then finally name the resources available through the Alzheimer's Association. So hopefully these are the things you'll take away. Moving on to the next slide. Here we have a fictitious family called the Garcias. And so we'll be checking in with this fictitious family throughout this afternoon's presentation. There's a woman by the name of Mary. She has daughters who will be discussing the concerns about what they're noticing in their mother's decline in terms of her cognitive functioning. So first there's Mary. She's a 73-year-old widow. She lives alone. She's a retired teacher. She takes meticulous care of her home. Her eldest daughter, Lydia, to the left, lives a few miles away from her mom. She's often in touch with her mother and frequently visits. And then Patricia, to the right, lives in another state. She works very long hours. She's not able to come home to visit her mom as often as she would like. And she often communicates with her mother and her sister to figure out what's going on. So the first thing we see is a text message that's going on between the two sisters. We'll go to that. One of them says that they're worried about mom. The other one says, probably there's just some normal little forgetfulness things going on. And then the other one says, are you sure? She's really kind of worried about what's going on. And then they're going to reach out to a neighbor. And Dr. Soloway is a real physician. He has been a previous consultant to the National Alzheimer's Association. So we'll click on that arrow and hear what Dr. Soloway has to say.
As we get older, cognitive problems become more noticeable for almost everybody, and it can vary from person to person. Typically with age, people have trouble coming up with the word they want right when they want it. They have trouble remembering names, and they don't think quite as quickly. What's more concerning, or what might be the beginning of a memory problem, is people have a lot of trouble coming up with words or names, and it's happening more frequently, and the words or names don't necessarily come to them later. And then they start misplacing things, but not just once in a while, because we all misplace things, but more often. And it begins to interfere day to day. That should be a warning sign for people that this might be the beginning of a memory problem.
And so the big takeaway that Dr. Soloway mentioned is that it's interfering on a day-to-day basis. As he indicated, we all may have a quick lapse in memory. Where did I put my car keys? What's your name? What's today's date? When do I have my doctor's appointment? But if this is going on a persistent daily basis, that is cause for concern. And moving on to the next step, we're going to talk more about dementia and Alzheimer's and what some of the common warning signs are. And clearly you may have heard the term dementia and Alzheimer's, and oftentimes they may be used interchangeably, but there are clearly some significant differences between the two, and we're going to learn more about them. So let's hear from Dr. Heather Snyder. She's with the Alzheimer's Association, and she's going to talk about the distinctions between Alzheimer's, dementia, and a few other things. So let's roll those videos.
Dementia is the umbrella term for an individual's changes in memory, thinking, or reasoning. There are many possible causes of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the most common cause. Other causes of dementia are vascular dementia, which is marked by changes in the blood flow in the blood vessels in the brain. Dementia with Lewy bodies, identified by specific brain changes throughout the brain that include the buildup of a protein known as alpha-synuclein. And frontal temporal dementia, which is marked by brain cell loss in the front sections of the brain or the frontal lobe. Each type of dementia may have distinct characteristics to cause specific behaviors in the individual, but there is also some overlap in behaviors among the types of dementia.
More than 100 years ago, Dr. Alice Alzheimer's described specific changes in the brain, what we call the formation of plaques and tangles. Now, Alzheimer's is a progressive brain disease that's marked by these key changes and is thought to impact memory, thinking, and behavior. The brain has three main parts: the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. Each one plays a role in how the body functions. The cerebrum fills up most of your skull. It is part of the brain most involved in remembering, problem solving, thinking, and even feelings. There are about 100 billion nerve cells or neurons throughout the brain that transmit messages in order for us to create memories, feelings, and thoughts. Alzheimer's disease causes nerve cells to die, which leads to the brain tissue loss, or what we call shrinkage, and causes loss of function and communication between cells. These changes can cause the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, such as memory loss, problems with thinking, planning, behavioral issues, and even at the end stages, problems with swallowing.
It's important to know what the warning signs of Alzheimer's are and to be on the lookout. We know that we change over time, and the warning signs of Alzheimer's can be warning signs of a number of things. But when you see those in yourself or in someone you care about, it's important to check it out, to consult with a doctor, to find out what you're dealing with.
So now we understand that dementia, again, is an umbrella term. That's like somebody saying, well, I have heart disease. Well, what kind of heart disease do you have? Well, I have arterial sclerosis, or maybe I have tachycardia, or maybe I have arrhythmia. So the same thing with dementia. What type of dementia do you have? I have Alzheimer's or frontal temporal lobe or Lewy bodies. And we've heard a little bit more about frontal temporal lobe in the last few days in view of the actor Bruce Willis being diagnosed. Last year, they said initially it was aphasia, now it's frontal temporal lobe. Unlike Alzheimer's, which affects memory, frontal temporal lobe affects the ability to speak. Although eventually, unfortunately, because the nature of the soliloquy of how the brain gets destroyed by the progressive degenerative disease, he'll end up with similar symptoms as somebody with Alzheimer's. And again, as Drew indicated, it's important to get an early diagnosis, and we'll talk about that a little bit more momentarily. So let's move on to the next slide that will highlight the 10 warning signs. So here they are: memory loss, challenges in planning and solving problems, difficulty in completing tasks, confusion with doing some of the same things one has typically done, issues around time and place, decreased poor judgment, misplacing things, not being able to solve new problems, things of that nature. And as we heard, it's important to know that the warning signs, what they are, and what to look out for. And the Alzheimer's Association is a leader in this area, and it's developed these 10 warning signs to help people understand the difference between normal aging and the common signs of possible dementia. And not all 10 warning signs might need to be going on concomitantly. There may be a few, there may be one or two. But this list, again, is only a tool to help identify unusual changes that will affect a person's memory, thinking, and behavior on a consistent basis. And again, individuals may experience one or more of these signs in different degrees. And so now let's explore each one of these particular signs. So first, let's talk about memory loss that disrupts daily life. One of the most common signs of Alzheimer's, especially early on, is forgetting recently learned information. So imagine, if you will, somebody's just learned how to bake a cake. And then a week later, they go back and they can't remember the ingredients or the particular steps, what actual degree to set the oven on. Others include forgetting important dates or events repeatedly, and I underscore that, repeatedly asking the same questions and increasingly relying on memory aids, stickies. There may be a particular loved one. John, what is today's date? John, when's my doctor's appointment? Where are we, John? So, that kind of thing. On the other hand, a typical age-related change is, again, sometimes forgetting important information. We all do that. We always say the proverbial senior moment, if you will. So let's move on to number 2. Challenges in planning or solving problems. And in this case, some people may experience new difficulties in executive functioning, including developing or following a plan or difficulty concentrating. Conversely, a more typical age-related change is making occasional errors when managing bills or household finances. So, we forget to add up correctly. That's typical. But again, not being able to plan out or figuring out some complex situation. We're going to hear from a real life person who's living with dementia, and he has Lewy bodies. So we'll hear about his experience.
I was probably spending 4 to 5 times more time preparing for something than I did, say, 5 or 10 years ago, because of I would lose my thought, I'd lose my focus, I'd get anxious, I wouldn't get to sleep. I was thinking I was in my sleep, I was thinking about what I was anxious about, which was I was trying to remember, which was I was trying to prepare, which I was trying to do. So it was really a vicious circle of, so I was able to control it a lot, so that people wouldn't see things, and there weren't things to be seen. It's what was disturbing me was what effort I had to put into to do the things I used to do more easily.
Okay, and then the next one, difficulty completing familiar tasks. And in this situation, people living with dementia often find it hard to complete daily tasks that used to be managed with ease. Imagine again, if you will, you are the absolute baker in the family, you make the best peach cobbler, what have you, but you can't follow the recipe. Or it was the case with my late wife, who unfortunately was diagnosed in her mid-50s with early onset dementia and eventually Alzheimer's 2 years later. She was an avid sewer, an avid seamstress. She could put together patterns in an instant. And I noticed one evening when I came home, I said, Bernita, you've been working on the same pattern now for like, looks like 2 or 3 days. And I looked over her shoulder and it was like number 3 matching number 4. And I was like, shouldn't number 3 be matching number 3? So, she couldn't figure out how to complete a task she could probably do in her sleep. Also, similarly, she would come to me and she said, how do I get to the hairdresser? Like, Bernita, you've been going to your hairdresser, once a month for years. It's the same thing. Go down to Hampshire Avenue, make a right, I can't remember, so, doing those familiar tasks, not being able to drive, those sorts of things. Again, a typical age-related situation, occasionally, I underscore occasionally, we might forget how to use the microwave or remote. Frankly, I'm a little tech challenged. That's why, thank God, Mr. Watson is running the slides. So, having challenges with new technology, figuring out the remote control, that sort of thing. We're going to hear from a dementia expert that's going to talk a little bit more about dementia in this regard.
Some people have difficulty with math or with reading in a way that's unusual to them. And once again, this is a change in that person. So, for example, we all know somebody who was never able to balance their checkbook, right? So that wouldn't be a warning sign for them. But if somebody who always balanced their checkbook to the penny suddenly was paying bills, the same bill over and over, and not able to balance their finances, well, that would be a sign for them.
Okay, moving on to number 4. What are possible signs in terms of confusion with time or place? An individual living with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia may lose track of dates, seasons, or the passage of time. They may have trouble understanding something if it's not currently happening, or become confused about where they are or how they got there. And this can become more dramatic or profound in the middle or late stages of the disease. Again, in the case of my late wife, she thought she had a doctor's appointment in downtown Silver Spring, went down to the doctor's office. The doctor said, Mrs. Smith, you're not due for another month. Luckily, they called me to let me know my wife had gone down to the doctor's office. And I didn't hear back from her or the doctor. Got home from work that night, no wife. We ended up having to call Montgomery County Police Department, and they were searching, luckily around the time that this happened. My sister was working for the Discovery Center downtown Silver Spring. Montgomery County Police did a search, found her car in a parking lot, even further away from the doctor's office. My brother-in-law, they lived in downtown Silver Spring at the time, was walking around Whole Foods. Who happens to be in Whole Foods but my late wife? Hey, Lynn, how you doing? What are you doing here? I'm waiting for Michael. Lynn's like, Michael's not down here to pick you up. So she was majorly disoriented. And so that's just an example of how getting majorly confused with time and place, that sort of thing. Again, typical age-related, we might be confused about what day of the week it is, a time of an appointment, but we quickly say, oh, wait a minute, today is Thursday, the 23rd. My appointment's not until next Thursday. So that's more typical age-related. Why don't we skip this one, Mike, and move on to the next slide, number 5, talking about trouble understanding visual images. So we can just kind of keep track of time. So in this one, trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. No one in this instance has an eye problem. In other words, it's not an issue of glaucoma or cataracts. It's somewhere in the brain dealing spatially with understanding things. So some individuals with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia may have vision problems. In other words, they might have difficulty understanding the depth in stairwells or going up and down steps, trouble reading, problem judging distances and determining colors and contrast. Another real life example with my late wife, when I was driving, she was in the passenger seat. If a car was merging into the right lane, her visual spatial, she thought that car was literally coming on top of us. And so she'd get majorly startled and upset. And I'm like, calm down. The car is merely in the lane adjacent to us. Even going up and down steps eventually became an issue. She couldn't understand that, there was steps. She saw it as one major plane, if you will. This sign shows us that these changes are not just about memory. So again, Alzheimer's and dementia isn't about just memories. It can also be about other important impacts on daily functioning. And again, we're going to hear from an expert in this one that's going to talk a little bit more about what this means.
Alzheimer's disease is not just a disease of memory. It can affect other things too. It can affect the way that we perceive what we see. So sometimes somebody in the early stages of Alzheimer's might go to the eye doctor because they're having trouble seeing. And in fact, their vision is just fine, but the way they're perceiving what they're seeing may be difficult.
So moving on to the next one, number 6. New problems with words in speaking and writing. Individuals may have trouble following or joining conversations. They may stop in the middle of their own conversation and forget what they're trying to say. They might also struggle with finding the right word or call things by the correct name, or they may end up calling things by the wrong name. You may also have a loved one who's bilingual and they're reverting back to their native tongue, if you will, and using inappropriate or incorrect words. They may start using more descriptive terms to talk about something. So rather than being able to say, this is a watch, they may just say, round thing, hand. So, that's what they're saying. We're going to skip this video and we're going to move on to number 7. So in this case, it's misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace steps. And in this sign often causes concern in people. I want to clarify, though, that this is not just about losing your keys on occasion. Misplacing things from time to time is, again, sometimes a normal part of the aging process, but we're able to retrace our steps and find what we've misplaced. Here's my keys, here's my phone, that sort of thing. But a person with Alzheimer's disease may lose things and not be able to recall where they last had them or saw them or identify the location. For a while, a real life example again with my late wife, she was able, I would have her picked up in the morning to go to daycare. And she was able to let herself in the house. That went on for about the first year. But eventually she would get in the house and then she would misplace her purse. She sometimes would call me and say, Michael, somebody stole my purse. I was like, Bernita, somebody could not have stolen your purse, sweetheart. You got in the house. And I would get home and I would start looking. She would hide the purse under the couch. She would hide it in the linen closet. And not being able to remember what she was doing. Eventually, I was able to get a tracker to put on the keys and put it in her purse. So I could beep, beep, beep and know where it was. This affects what's called part of the executive functioning. And because of the lack of executive functioning and awareness, the person may grow increasingly suspicious of others and start accusing others of stealing things. So this is when you hear people saying, somebody stole my money. Or other things, because again, they are the ones that are putting things in unusual places and not even remembering what or where they've put things. So we'll hear from this individual because I think this is an interesting story. We'll click on this video.
So some people wonder if they lose their keys or their glasses or their purse, is that a sign of Alzheimer's? And one thing that I would say about that is for most of us, we might misplace something, but then if we retrace our steps, we can usually find it. We can usually remember. For a person with Alzheimer's, sometimes they're not able to retrace their steps. Sometimes that memory is just gone. And so when they do find their keys next to the phone because they got interrupted by a phone call when they were coming in, they set their keys down in an unusual space. So there they are next to the phone. If that happened to you or me, we'd probably remember, oh yeah, the phone was ringing when I came in the door. I put down my keys. The person with Alzheimer's might not remember. They might wonder who's moving their keys around because they never put their keys by the phone. So that's just a little bit of a difference in some of the dynamics with losing things in Alzheimer's.
Okay. So moving on to number 8, decreased or poor judgment. Individuals may experience changes in judgment or decision-making, such as using poor judgment when dealing with money or paying less attention to hygiene and grooming. This can especially be common in individuals who live alone. Making a bad decision on occasion, again, such as paying the bill or forgetting something, is more typical age-related. And we see, unfortunately, when people have issues around decreased poor judgment, some telemarketer comes and they end up doling out millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars or writing checks to bogus charities and not realizing what they're doing because, they get suckered in because, unfortunately, their judgment has been compromised. We're going to skip this video. We're going to move on to number 9 and talk about withdrawal from work or social activities. And as we age, it's normal to be uninterested by family or social engagement from time to time. I don't feel like going out today. I'm tired. However, someone who is experiencing dementia-related changes may start to lose their ability to hold and follow conversations. And as a result, they begin to withdraw from almost all social encounters or hobbies. They may lose the confidence to engage in these types of activities. And so we're going to hear again from Dr. Soloway regarding this. So we'll click on this video.
One of the most common changes and early on is the person's comfort zone shrinks a little bit, and then that gets worse throughout the course of the illness. So they're less comfortable going out, they're less motivated to do things than they were in the past. So there's some change in day-to-day functioning that way. I think people also lose confidence in their cognitive abilities because they may not recognize someone or know their name or find the right word, and they'll feel awkward, and they don't want people to notice that, so they feel more comfortable at home or in situations with family where they're very, very comfortable with that wouldn't concern them. So people tend to withdraw a little bit and be less outgoing. That's can be one of the early signs of Alzheimer's.
Okay, so moving on to the next one. Would changes in mood and personality. Individuals with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia may become confused. They may be suspicious, depressed, fearful, or anxious. They may get easily upset, either at home or when out of their comfort zone. On the other hand, as we age, it's normal to develop very specific ways of doing things. Someone with Alzheimer's or other dementia may become fearful, angrily, easily frustrated, which is something that should be addressed. And we're going to hear one more time from Dr. Soloway in this regard.
Another early sign of Alzheimer's or dementia is subtle changes in behavior. So all of a sudden, the family may notice the person is more easily irritated or more impatient or a little moody or have a shorter fuse or more anxious. Now, there's lots of things that can cause that, but often that can be an early symptom of Alzheimer's or go along with the early symptoms of memory loss.
Okay, so we're going to move on. And so we'll just quickly check back with the Garcia. So there's a screenshot, kind of a text message going back and forth, and the sisters are like, so now that we know the 10 warning signs, what are we going to do? How do we know if it's like Alzheimer's or is it something else? Is it serious? So on and so forth. And let's play that quick video from Dr. Soloway again. Yeah, this is the text message the sisters are exchanging. And then we'll hear from Dr. Soloway.
Memory is not all or none, especially when there are early symptoms or signs. So on a good day, people might function very well and not really no one notices there's a memory problem. But on other days, especially if they're tired, then things become more noticeable. So memory is variable. It's not all or none. And then there are different type of symptoms that develop for each person. So some people may have trouble with language, may have trouble with organizing themselves, may have trouble navigating while driving, and other people don't have the same symptoms. So you don't have to have every symptom of Alzheimer's to be concerned. And I think the most important thing is determining what has changed from that person's normal level of functioning. And usually people have a pretty keen sense of, what they can normally do well. And then when either they or the family notice that there has been some change from that usual pattern of functioning, that should be a warning sign to people, but they don't have to check off all the boxes.
So Dr. Soloway gave us a good recap. It's important to remember that the warning signs are intended to be a guide to help identify problems in memory, thinking, or behavior that may be related to Alzheimer's or dementia. And frankly, it could be another medical condition, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Individuals may experience one, all, or some of the signs of potential dementia in varying degrees and in numerous or single occurrences. They may not experience all of them at once. It's important, though, to discuss any changes in memory, thinking, or behavior that we're noticing in our loved ones as soon as possible. So now we're going to talk about the importance of early detection. It's critical that we pay attention to what our own cognitive health is and not dismiss any changes in ourselves or the loved ones around us. Any changes that are unusual in our own particular levels of functioning or someone else that's around us clearly is cause for concern. And it's important for us to intervene as soon as possible. So we'll click on these two boxes to hear from an expert and then a loved one who discovered some things about her husband.
It's a very interesting phenomenon that people who have memory problems are often less aware of it than family members or their friends who know them well. One of the reasons for that is our ability to monitor ourselves, which is an important part of brain function, decreases when we start having memory problems. Not in everybody, but commonly, and more than half the people with memory problems. And so the person is just not keeping track of the trouble they're having day to day. But the family members are, paying attention. If they're paying attention, they see, boy, this is starting to happen a lot. And the person's not aware of it. So the family's more aware, and they may talk to their loved one about it. And they say, I've noticed you've been repeating yourself. And they say, I'm not repeating myself. And that could either be due to the fact that they're not aware of it, or they may not want to acknowledge it.
Okay.
I was so adamant about what was happening to Daryl. I wasn't sure. I didn't know. And this wasn't the person that I know. This wasn't the person. Daryl was my husband was very, he always had to be building or designing or working with his hands. And it was getting to the point where he wasn't, and he was becoming very frustrated when he was forgetting to do things or go places.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about what you should do if you do notice changes in someone. So if you're continuing to observe these changes, it's critical that you have a plan of action and take some next steps to have a conversation with the loved one. Clearly, having these types of conversations can be quite difficult. They may be defensive. You may feel uncomfortable saying, hey, I'm noticing some things. But the Alzheimer's Association has come up with this roadmap as a guide to help develop some steps in addressing memory concerns, and hopefully in a less daunting and in a more productive sort of manner. So let's go through the different steps. Number one, what changes in memory, thinking, or behavior are you seeing? What is the person doing or not doing that's causing concern? So again, these things have gone on for a regular period of time. It's almost potentially a daily occurrence. And so what's causing you concern? And you may even, as you're beginning to notice things, take some notes. So that way you have some documentation. Last week, Monday, I noticed X. Last Tuesday, I noticed. Today, I noticed. So that way you've got data, if you will, that you can present when it's the time to have that conversation. Number two, what else is going on? Various conditions can cause changes in memory, thinking, and behavior. Are there other health or lifestyle issues that could be contributing to these changes? Is the individual under a tremendous amount of stress? Do they have diabetes? Are they having some major imbalance in their blood sugar, which can mimic some cognitive issues? Do they have a urinary tract infection, particularly older folks, both in men and women? That can create some cognitive issues. Has there been a change in medication? I know a dear friend of mine a few years ago, her mother was exhibiting some cognitive challenges. Her mother lived in Florida. She went down, she went to another doctor. Actually, I think it was an urgent care clinic. She made sure she took all her mom's medicines. And the urgent care physician was like, my God, you're taking like 15 different meds. And this med can create agitation, which then compromises this med. And so it's no wonder your mother's confused. And so the urgent care physician tweaked some of her medications. And over the course of time, my friend's mom returned to a normal base of functioning, if you will. She wasn't as confused or disoriented, that sort of thing. So understanding what else is going on in terms of environmental factors, the stress, are there mental health issues? Are there other medical conditions, things of that nature? Number 3, learn about the signs and the benefits of early diagnosis. And clearly you're doing that by having this conversation this afternoon. Do you notice any of these changes in the person that you're concerned about? So knowing things like what we're talking about today is informative in helping you have that conversation. Number 4, has anyone else? So the importance of talking with other family members, talking with adult children, with neighbors that know your loved one well. Yeah, I noticed that mom always is walking out of the house and wandering around the neighborhood. Or a neighbor may come to you and say, I saw Joanna down the end of the street yesterday, and she looked like she was majorly confused, and she didn't even have her coat on. It was a little bit chilly outside. So you're taking all that data, all that information in, and you may even decide, besides yourself, is there another family member that can have the conversation? Not that you want everybody involved, because then the person's going to feel ganged up and overwhelmed, but 1 or 2 significant individuals. And the other thing I must say, as we're having these conversations with our loved ones, having them in a respectful, calm, non-judgmental, non-accusatory tone, so that they don't end up feeling on the defense, they're not feeling overwhelmed, things of that nature. Number 5, move on to number 5. As I was saying, who's going to be involved? A trusted family member, a friend. It's best to speak one-on-one. So again, the person doesn't feel ganged up or ambushed. But if there are other individuals, because sometimes there is power in numbers. So being strategic and who else might join you in this conversation. But again, saying things in a very calm, non-judgmental way, and giving real life examples. And if you do get pushback, don't get on the defense. No, we did notice, but I understand this is hard to talk about, Mom. Yeah, it is hard for you to realize sometimes you did walk outside and you didn't have your coat on and you didn't know where you were going. Yeah, it's scary. And so you're even kind of acknowledging maybe some of their own fears, their own emotions about what this means, to come to terms with recognizing, gee, I'm showing signs that I'm having some issues. There's some potential thinking, memory, or behavior changes that's going on. And number 6 talks about, as we go to that slide, where and when should the conversation be held? So, having it, again, maybe in the evening when, the TV's turned off, it's calm, not having it at the spur of the moment when you're out in public and, darn it, you've done this for the 2nd time this week, blah, 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 blah. Or I need to talk to you first thing in the morning, finding a calm, appropriate time and place. And you should also consider, again, what makes the person most comfortable. So, if you're sitting down having breakfast, maybe over the course of a meal, over a cup of coffee or something of that nature, so that you have a calm environment and they're relaxed and everybody's in a state to be receptive to what about the conversation is going to be. Number 7, what will you or the person having the conversation say? Again, you may want to build out somewhat of a script. Consider the following. I've noticed X in you, and I'm concerned. Have you noticed this, mom or dad, in yourself? How have you been feeling lately? So they may own up to, yeah, I've had some issues, or child, I'm just fine. Leave me alone. Move on. And so when that happens, it's important to realize you may have to have multiple conversations. So we're going to move on to the next one. And in this situation, if they're willing to go to the doctor, offer to go with them. Ask the person to see a doctor and, say, hey, let's go together. You know what? Why don't we, after we go to the doctors, let's go have lunch. So you're making it kind of a fun activity. You may even want to say to them, and I didn't realize this until I turned 65, if they've not had their annual wellness visit per Medicare, being able to say, gee, mom or dad or aunt, whomever, you haven't had your annual Medicare visit. Why don't I schedule that and I'll go with you? Because a comprehensive Medicare visit, the doctor's going to ask about your physical health, your mental health, your social health, things of that nature. So they'll get at some of the questions that may touch upon issues around thinking, memory, and behavior. So, accompanying them. If you can accompany them, maybe again, sending an email or whatever to the doctor in advance to say, I want to give you a heads up that I noticed some issues with my loved one, and here are my concerns, so that the doctor is fully informed, and they may be able to ask, as part of their assessment, some probing questions. Please tell me today's date. Please tell me where you are. Can you count backwards by 3s from 100? So they may do what's called a mini mental status exam as part of the overall physical to get at what's going on. And number 9, and I've kind of already said this as we move on to the next one, it's going to take probably multiple conversations. And please don't be discouraged if the first conversation is not successful. Don't dismiss the changes you're noticing simply because your loved one is reluctant to address them or have the conversation. So be tenacious, be patient, be respectful, but have that conversation. Get them to a place that they feel comfortable in going to the healthcare provider so you can better understand what's going on. Because again, it may or may not even be dementia or Alzheimer's. May be another medical condition. Sometimes people have had many strokes that we've not been aware of, and they too can affect one's cognitive functioning. So we'll move on to the next slide. The other resource is turning to the Alzheimer's Association. So we can be a tremendous resource, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But let's move on to the next slide in terms of, if you go see the doctor, what's the best doctor to go see? Often we all have our family physicians, we have our internists, and they are at the front line of helping us with our health care, clearly. But there are other types of doctors that might be able to better assess things around issues of Alzheimer's and dementia. So we go to that slide and I'll show a little bit more about the types of medical doctors. So there's some doctors that are called geriatricians. They have additional training in medical care for diseases and conditions common in folks over the age of 65, neurologists who specialize in diseases of the brain and nervous system, neuropsychologists who can assess, diagnose, or treat psychological disorders, psychiatrists who specialize in disorders that affect mood or the way our mind works. Finally, psychologists who specialize in training in testing memory or other mental health functions. And sometimes what your primary care physician, your internist or family practitioner might do is refer you to one of these specialists, or they may refer you to a team of specialists. I know at some of our medical centers, whether we're talking about here in Washington, Georgetown, Howard, George Washington, Johns Hopkins, whatever your major healthcare centers are, our research facilities, they may have teams of these various doctors that will do a neuropsychological evaluation, that will do a neurological, that might prescribe to a psychiatrist some medication. So these are the types of other healthcare providers that can be of help. Now moving on to what are the benefits of early detection. Move on to the next slide real quick. Okay, we'll hear from Ms. Drew.
There are a number of benefits in early detection of Alzheimer's. For one thing, a person is able to have a voice in what happens next. They can make plans. They can live life more on their own terms. They can also make plans for the future, financial plans, care plans. They can let people know what they want, which can be a real gift later on. It also allows time for families to make plans and to make decisions about who can do what and figure out care and those kinds of issues. Some people are interested in clinical trials. Clinical trials allow people to have access to treatments that aren't available yet. And for some people, that can be a really important thing to pursue.
Okay. I'm aware of our time. Michael, can we get to the slide that talks about possible assessment and tests? So we'll do that. We'll talk quickly about diagnosis, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So we're going to click through some of the slides. So in terms of a diagnostic process, it's pretty comprehensive. Let's look at this real quick. So assessment includes a medical history. So, what all family history, previous medical conditions, an actual physical exam at the time of seeing the healthcare provider, a screening for depression or other mental health conditions, interview, as I said earlier, with companions, family members. There may be lab tests, blood work, a mini status cognitive exam. There may be brain imaging like a CT scan or an MRI. There may be cerebrospinal fluid taps. So all of these can help with a potential diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. We're going to skip through some additional slides and we're going to just, I tell you what, why don't we just get to the last slide and talk about how the Alzheimer's Association can be a resource. So quickly, we just want to highlight the fact that we have a 24/7 helpline, 1-800-272-3900, 1-800-272-3900. That's a 24/7 helpline. It's staffed by trained professionals. We can get an interpreter that can speak any language, so that should not be an area of concern. Also through our website, alz.org, we have tons of resources. There's a link that talks about health for caregivers. There's also something called alz.org/C for community, R for resources, F for finder, community resource finder. The Alzheimer's Association, in conjunction with the AARP, has created that website that can provide resources in the DMV area. So, we are a partner with the NCBA and working with the Black aged to make sure that no one has to deal with issues of Alzheimer's or dementia alone. It can be very scary. It can be very daunting. It can be very overwhelming, but you have partners. You have partners in the NBCA. You clearly have a partner in the Alzheimer's Association as a free major resource to provide information, support. In the DMV, we have 75 support groups all over the Washington, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Northern Virginia areas for caregivers, for adult caregivers, for family members, things of that nature. So why don't I stop here? Let's look at the chat and see what questions might be in the chat.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you for joining us again. And thank you always for your thoughtful presentation. And I'm happy to share the questions with you if you'd like.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. We have several questions here. So I'm going to read them backwards here. So the first question reads, are clinical trials available to everyone?
Quickly, yes. And let me underscore, clinical trials are important. The Alzheimer's Association does have something called Trial Match. So if you go to our website, click on Trial Match, you can hopefully pull up a trial match that's going to help your loved one. The reality is we in communities of color, in the African-American community in particular, we're twice as likely than the major population to get Alzheimer's and dementia. So it's critical that we are involved in clinical studies and clinical trials to better understand how some of the potential medications that can help either slow down or hopefully, please God, at some point cure Alzheimer's affects us in particular. So yes, there is importance of clinical trials.
Thank you. And the next question reads, does private insurance, Medicare and Medicaid, pay for Alzheimer's tests and ongoing care?
I believe they do. I would strongly encourage the individual to reach out to Medicare just to double check. I know, as an example, unfortunately, currently, there are two medications that the Food and Drug Administration has preliminarily approved, lecanemab and Aduhelm, and the Medicare and Medicaid have not provided payment for those medications yet. The Alzheimer's Association and other lobbying groups are talking to the federal government to ensure FDA gives a final approval so that those medications will be covered by Medicare and Medicaid.
And just to build on that a little bit, is there a time frame that the approval, will it be this year, next year? Do you have any insight on that?
That's hard to say. I would suggest maybe hopefully within another 12 to 24 months. They've given, again, preliminary approval in 2021 to Aduhelm, and they've given early approval this year to lecanemab, but we're waiting for final approval. So stay tuned on both those fronts.
Okay, thank you for that. And our next question asks, does the Alzheimer's Association offer families assistance in guiding their conversations with their loved one? Will someone from the association come to your home?
I will defer to Mr. Watson with the Alzheimer's Association. I don't think they will physically come to your home, but they offer care planning by a phone. I know Mr. Watson and other program managers do that. I know our 24/7 helpline, the consultants, the trained individuals there will do that. I'm not sure, and Michael, again, maybe you can speak to this, if as an example, somebody on the 24/7 helpline could be available while you're having the conversation with a loved one, but I don't think we physically will come out to a person's home. But Michael, if you could speak more to that.
Yes, so what we do, and I'll be brief, we do care consultations. And so what that is essentially is you have one of the program managers based on where you live, do a care consultation with your family, either virtually, sometimes in person. And basically we discuss the care plan. We get the family involved kind of with the next steps once you get the diagnosis, and then what you can do to create a care plan and a care team for that family member. How do you get in contact with your church family or the community at large and let them know what those next steps are? So we really just want to set the tone of what that looks like for you as a family, what other individuals involved that you should get involved as a care team, and then kind of walk you through those process as the person progresses from the early stage.
And so, Mr. Watson, I'm going to ask, will that care team stay with my family if I've got to have multiple conversations to get my loved one the care that they need? Will the same care team that I start out with, will you be with me throughout this process?
So for us as program managers, yes, we'll definitely be with you throughout the process. Your care team, the individuals that you identify who you want to be a part of that process as your loved one progresses, that can change, right? We see that a lot of times, maybe it's overwhelming for them or it's too much. So as that fluctuates, you can bring in other people or other individuals. That's why we always suggest in those consultations, cast the wide net, see the individuals who you know can be there. And we understand that will change. So as that process kind of goes that way, if you can pick other people from the community or your church family, other individuals you think will be helpful, we definitely want to support you in that in any way we can.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm going to digress a bit and go back to something Mr. Smith said. Mr. Smith mentioned we might have to have multiple conversations with our loved one and spoke to the importance of being patient and so on. How important is it for the same person or persons to be a part of this conversation? And if we can't get that person or persons, is it okay to have a new face involved with this conversation?
So I would say it if possible, say a family member is in town, maybe for a week or two, and they're present to have the conversation, but they're going back home. Maybe having another individual. The important thing is, I think, whomever's involved in the conversation, that they're respectful, that they're calm, that they are providing facts to the loved one in terms of what they're observing. And if someone can't be there, maybe the other individual who is present can take the notes of the individual. Here's what I've noticed. Unfortunately, I got to go back home because I'm only here for a week, sort of a thing. And they can share what the other family member has observed. Does that make sense? So
It does. Thank
the
you.
person's not present, but at least their data, if you will, is being conveyed to the individual that we're having concerns about.
Okay. And so just to kind of build on that one, before I have this conversation, or we have this conversations with our loved one, is it important to have that doctor's appointment in place? And if we don't have that doctor's appointment in place, can you give us some guidance on what maybe day 2 might look like or should look like after we've broached this conversation, and now what?
So I would say it would be important, once you've had the conversation several times, to go ahead and book the appointment so that you have that in hand. It's almost an intervention, if you will. Gee, mom or dad, remember last 2 weeks we've been talking about some troubles? Well, guess what? Next Monday, we're going to go see the doctor, Monday, the 27th of February. And you know what? Let's have a fun day. Let's go have lunch. Now, when you say it was this after you have the conversation with the doctor?
No, this is after I have the conversation with my loved one. And just
Yes.
hypothetically, if I don't have a doctor's appointment already scheduled, what should I do? Or should I wait until I've got the appointment with the doctor the next day, we're raring to go? What should I do if I don't have it?
Well,
Then what happens?
I think it would be important, and this is my own thinking, so take it for what it's worth. Again, if you've had the conversations, tee up that doctor's appointment, because you don't want to have the conversations and then, so where does it go?
Right. Okay.
Or you don't want to have the conversations and 2 months out from now, the doctor's appointment is scheduled. Although, I know, unfortunately, there are some doctors that appointments are really backed up. So, you may want to call the doctor's office and say, I'm having some concerns about my loved one. How soon can I get them in? And so if they say, I don't have my next available appointment until mid-March, you may want to then start thinking about leading up the conversations to that mid-March appointment. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank
So
you.
it's all kind of timely, and it's relevant, and it's kind of the hot button topic, if you will.
Okay. We've got two minutes to go. We've got
Okay.
several questions. And Mr. Smith, I'd like to, if we don't get to these questions, I'd like to ask if I can email you those questions and then get the answers to the person, person asking the question. Would that be
Sure.
okay?
Sure.
Okay. So in 2 minutes, I'd like to ask you for your guidance on a next step, our plan of action. What should we do now that we have this knowledge and maybe a loved one in mind that we'd like to broach this conversation with? What should we do? Should we write notes and get a script going of what we want to say? And what should we do? What should our plan of action be?
So the plan of action indeed should be, Ms. Bodie, taking notes, finding out a time you want to have that conversation with the loved one, or multiple conversations, getting what their reactions are, getting that doctor's appointment scheduled. And even as you're waiting for that doctor's appointment, continuing to have the conversation, continuing to have notation of what you're observing, so that you're fully informed when you go to the doctor. And then the doctor can make an assessment, can make a determination, is or isn't it Alzheimer's or others of another form of dementia, and then what the treatment plan might be. It might be, further testing, further assessment. There may be a hard diagnosis, and then what are the resources? What are the medications or other interventions going to be in that regard?
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are exactly at 2 o'clock. And so I want to respect your time, Mr. Smith. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much. And to our audience, thank you again for joining us. And we like to give you your afternoon back and hope you'll join us again soon. And many thanks to the Alzheimer's Association.
Thank you all for having us. Have a good afternoon.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.